Welcome back to Thursday Thoughts, a Bourbon Lens production. In this week's episode, we are going to be discussing probably one of the things that grinds my gears the most. How much better is this whiskey, George T. Stagg, than Evan Williams White Label? Across the internet, you can scour to many different enthusiasts or whiskey writers and find different rating scales. One's a 90-point scale, one's a 5-point scale, one's 4 barrels, 5 barrels. But the question is, what makes a bourbon, right? So you think, or a whiskey, you think about these terms, you think about the nose, the palate, the finish, right? And we talk about these and we acquiesce on some of the grandiose terms that we can come up with, right? Because I feel like I have to use those terms because that's how people write. They write in these big terms and they're not as simple-minded as me sometimes, but that's okay. And I digress there. But the question is, what is the median bourbon or the median rye whiskey? We talk so much about the highly coveted bottles like George T. Stagg, but we forget about the bottles that we have to really build our palate up on. Evan Williams White Label, House Pour, where does that fall? How do you create the scale? Where does price come into this? Because price and availability should matter if you're talking to the everyday whiskey consumer. I might not have access to George T. Stagg every day, but I do have access to Evan Williams White Label. So where does that sit? How can I utilize that bottle? Where can I talk about the bottles that matter, that build my palate, that allow me to understand flavor profile, nuances, to understand how to nose a bourbon, how to taste a bourbon, how it feels on my palate at different places, what a finish is. Is it a Kentucky hug? Is it not? Is it the lingering notes that I get there? And so over the next couple of episodes on Thursday Thoughts, I want to explore with you all, how do we go from median bourbons to extraordinary bourbons, or bourbons that are less than the median, the middle ground, right? I can argue that I probably have more bourbons close to the middle than I do to the high end, and that's okay. They're exceptional pours for a reason. But the questions that we have to ask, like we do in our upcoming podcast, does proof equal value? Does price equal value? That's not always the case. Sometimes there's hidden gems on the shelf for $37.99. Case in point, go check out bourbonlens.com. 1792 port cask just came out. It's $37.99. Right. So really good bourbons can come at a lower price point, but because you don't associate the 1792 brand with Sazerac and Buffalo Trace like you do with George T. Stagg, you don't necessarily overpay for that bottle. Perception becomes reality in this sense. And to rate something always 90 or you always see the 90s, I don't think that's fair to a brand, because sometimes brands have to have workhorses. Brands have to have things that appeal to mass audience, that appeal to a bartender, that appeal to the person just getting into bourbon. And they might not be ready for 130 proof bourbon. And a lot of the enthusiasts, we've been guilty of it a time or two here on the Bourbon Lens, only talk about the proof of the bourbon. That's not fair, right? And so I think Evan Williams White Label is a little bit above the middle. So objectively, I want to start to build what I will call the Bourbon Lens Scale. And I really want it to be the community scale. I think if you look at the stuff that we do, we don't really celebrate us. We want to celebrate the community, because we don't drink alone. We have a community because of you all wanting to engage with us in conversation. And so that, I think, is the importance of this. How can we crowdsource a overall bourbon community score that maybe could be assimilated to the rest of the world? Now, all the things we have to take into consideration: our palates are different. We have different memories. We have different taste memories. We like different foods. We're from, different walks of life. That's fine. And that associates with the palate. And I think that's why a community score is important. And I think rating it holistically is always something that we should take into account. when Scott and I, talk about whiskeys in the past, we've never really put a score behind it, but we've put a buy or pass, associated with it. But I think that's just dishonest in a way that, something I might pass on, you might not. So why haven't I given it an objective rating? I want to explore this. And this Thursday Thoughts is going to be a little bit shorter than normal, but next week, I've already been working on the mapping of this. I didn't want to miss too many weeks of Thursday Thoughts. I've been beginning to work on the mapping and what value is associated with the nose, right? And what am I looking for that every whiskey person, from novice to a masterful tasters, like a John Wadle or a Jackie Zykan or a Melissa Rift would start to pick up on, right? So from the person just smelling bourbon for the first time to the person that does this on a daily basis, how can we adopt those notes? What things are we looking for, right? That are off-putting, that may lean this in a certain direction. And then from a flavor profile, right? From a palate perspective, what are we looking at? Are we looking at how it opens up the entire sensory part of our palate, front, middle, back? And from that finish perspective, it's not about the Kentucky hug. What lingers, in the words of Steve Coombs, what are we chewing on at the end of this, right? To really kind of adapt that finish. And what's the value there from a finish versus a nose versus a palate? Are all three of those weighted equally? I would disagree with that. I would say the nose is probably more important because we smell with our nose before we taste, and what is informed by our nose is how we taste. And then that finish is the lingering part of what we remember from our nose. So I think the nose doesn't always get the true value of what it is. And your eyes are going to see that as well. So bringing that in. And then I think the other element that we don't talk about enough because we don't think about this communally, us influencers, us whiskey writers, whatever, we look at the bottle and we say, I got George T. Stagg. This is an independent bottle. So, and it's got an independent rating. And you're probably like, Jake, this isn't opened. It's not my bottle, actually. It's my dad's. But he can't drink anymore. I saved that for a special day when maybe he's no longer here. But anywho, besides the fact, I digress. I could get really sad talking about that. But this, we rate it independently. We don't think about it as the whole, right? We don't think about it as the middle part of this, or what is a 1 or a 3. And then objectively, what we can create out of the middle is we can create the mean, right? So that means the average bourbon actually will swing up, right? We're going to see a scale or a curve. The bell curve will change a little bit. And over time, I believe that bell curve will probably sit in that 6 to 7 category, because we're going to see great production of whiskey continue to grow and develop. And you're going to see less and less 5, 4s, and 3s. But that's okay. We want to make sure that we do this right scientifically, and break it down as much as possible. Again, there's subjectivity here because I taste different than you taste. But what we want to do is to crowdsource bourbons that you all would like to taste. So on 5 Minute Fridays, we're not always rating the most illustrious, newest thing. We may say, hey, we're going back to taste an old trusty today. Community rating time. How would we rate Evan Williams White Label Bottle and Bond? And the reason why we pick this is batch variability is going to be a little bit dependent, right? Because it's the season, but it's going to be a consistent product. Or how do we rate just a standard Buffalo Trace? How do we rate Four Roses small batch, right? Those are the things that we're going to get to. So expect 2 of those a month, along with, some new releases that sprinkle in. So next week for Thursday Thoughts, I'm going to continue to spend some time. I'm going to probably bring a whiteboard. We're going to do a little algorithm, how we're going to get the score. And I want your feedback on that. So make sure you're liked and subscribed, because this is going to be a series within inside of a series, because I'm excited to talk about this. This has been something I have been very curious about for a long period of time. And I think there's a lot of bourbon consumers and whiskey consumers that are also curious on that. And how do we create a communal score that we can agree upon, that when we look at a whiskey, that the middle's okay. You don't always have to hit a home run. So let us know your thoughts. Make sure you're liking and subscribing to the Bourbon Lens. We'd love to have you as part of the community. If you want to join part of our growing community, go over to patreon.com/Bourbon Lens. We'd love to have you there. And until next time, cheers.